Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk here. I will talk about Bernoulli convolutions. So first I tell you what these are, and these will be the laws of certain random variables. And there is a parameter lambda. So let's fix a number between 0 and 1, and let psi0, psi1, etc. be a sequence of unbiased plus minus valued independent random variables, and the Bernoulli convolution with parameter lambda is the law of sum from 0 to infinity. This is I, psi I times lambda to the I. Okay, so this is a convergent power series. So this gives you a random variable, and it has a law. And this is the measure that I would like to understand. And so let's first look at some simple cases. So if lambda is less than 1, then nu lambda, which I didn't say, but it is the Bernoulli convolution with parameter lambda, then mu lambda is supported on a Cantor set and hence singular. Okay, so this is something which is called the Deville's staircase, and if lambda is equal to 1/2, then nu lambda is Lebesgue.
So the Fourier transform of these are easy to write.
Yes. Yes. So for lambda equals 1/2, these are Lebesgue on the interval, I guess, -2, 2. And this is because almost every number has a unique representation in base 2. And if lambda is bigger than 1/2, then it gets interesting. So that's pretty much not understood. Okay, so somehow the first question that you would like to understand is whether this measure is singular or absolutely continuous. And it would be naturally to expect that they are always absolutely continuous, but well, at least when I first heard about it, then that was my reaction, that they has to be. But surprisingly to me, they can be singular. So that is perhaps the earliest result about this is a result of Erdős from, I think it goes back to the 30s, or and it that if lambda is a Piso number, or better to say the inverse of lambda is Piso number, e.g. lambda is equal to square root of 5 minus 1 over 2, then nu lambda is singular. And the proof is not very difficult, because you can write down, as Peter said, you can write down the Fourier series of this measure, or the Fourier transform of this measure explicitly, and it will be an infinite product of cosines. So this is basically an infinite convolution of measures which are supported at 2 atoms. And such a the Fourier transform of such a convolution factor will be a cosine. And these numbers have the feature that if you take negative powers of lambda, they will approximate integers very fast. And the reason is that if you take the sum of all the Galois conjugates, then you get an integer, and all the other Galois conjugates are of absolute value bigger than 1. This is the assumption that lambda minus 1 is a Piso number. That's just the definition. And so the negative powers of those numbers are going exponentially to 0. And then it is a you can show that there is a special sequence such that the Fourier transform not converges to 0 if you go to infinity along the sequence. And then the Riemann-Lebesgue lemma tells you that it can't be absolutely continuous. Okay, so they can be singular, and but it turns out that most of the time they are absolutely continuous. So it was a result of Solomiak, I think in the 80s. That for almost every lambda between 1/2 and 1, nu lambda is absolutely continuous. Okay, and very recently there has been some very remarkable developments that this was taken further. And first there was a breakthrough by Hochmann who proved the following. So the set of all lambdas between 1/2 and 1 such that the dimension of nu lambda is strictly less than 1. So this set has packing dimension 0. Okay, so this is a somewhat weaker conclusion in the sense that the dimension is, it is talking about the dimension of the measure and not absolute continuity. But the exceptional set is very tiny. It is of dimension 0. And very soon after this, Shmerkin pushed this even further to the following. So I don't know. So this is a stronger statement than Hausdorff dimension. Okay, so it says that the set 1/2 such that nu lambda is singular,
The Piso conjecture has no bearing on this.
what is the Piso conjecture?
That if you take a real number bigger than 1, and if its powers approach the integers, the fractional, okay, so if the fractional parts tend to 0, the conjecture is then theta has to be a Piso number. So it tells you something about all real numbers in terms of just the distribution of the fractional parts. What you used was that the fractional part was going to 0. You didn't need it exponentially.
You need it. If so, basically, I think it is.
The convergence.
Um,
It's true that if the powers go to 0 fast enough to be summable, square
Yes.
summable,
yes.
then you are algebraic and Piso.
Yeah, I think I'm not quite sure, but I think that the result that you mentioned implies that those numbers for which the Fourier transform doesn't go to 0 are precisely the Piso numbers. That's
That started out.
so. I think what you can say is that so for all other numbers other than Piso, the Fourier transform will go to 0. But I'm that's what I believe, but
I think it's
not
something
sure.
a little different, but it's close.
So this set has Hausdorff dimension 0. So the difference between packing and Hausdorff dimension is not very important here, but what is important is that this was pushed further to get absolute continuity with very few exceptions. And Schmerkin relies on the result of Hochmann very much. So basically what he does is that he writes this measure as a convolution of two measures, one of them which has full dimension using the result of Hochmann, or at least his technology. I think more or less his result. And the other one will have power like Fourier decay, which follows from other arguments. And then he shows that if it takes the convolution of two such measures, it will be absolutely continuous. Okay, so now the interesting question is what happens if you ask this problem for concrete numbers.
What's happening when lambda is bigger than or equal to 1?
Then the power series doesn't converge, so there is no measure. Okay. So there is a simple observation. Which is that nu lambda is equal to the convolution of nu lambda to the k with some other measure nu. And this is simply that you look at the definition of the Bernoulli convolution and you collect together every kth term from this infinite series, and the law of the rest will be mu. Okay. So this implies, in particular, that if nu lambda to the k, if
That's what I mean by infinitely divisible laws.
yes. So that's Okay, I'm not sure. is absolutely continuous. Okay, so these are some concrete because you know it for nu 1/2. Okay, and there are some further examples. There are some further examples.
You want explicit absolutely continuous.
Yes. There are some further examples by Garcia. And his examples are he imposes some very restrictive conditions on the parameter, certain number theoretic properties, and then he can prove that it is absolutely continuous. But those are very special numbers. Okay, so somehow my goal is to understand this problem for algebraic numbers, and this is what the talk is about. And actually, I'm talking now about the first part of this project, and first I want to understand the dimension of this measure. And in this regard, Hochmann gives a lot of clue, because one thing that he proves is the following: that so if lambda is algebraic, then the dimension of mu lambda is equal to the minimum of 1 and h lambda over minus log lambda, where h lambda is equal to the limit of 1 over L times the Shannon entropy of the random variable xi I times lambda to the I goes from 0 to L minus 1. So H is the Shannon entropy. Okay, so this is just the first L terms of the sum defining the Bernoulli convolution. And this is some kind of measure of, if you take the first L iteration of the random variable defining the measure, how many points you get with some kind of with some kind of statistical information. So you don't want that most of the points concentrate on a single point and the rest have very small weight. But this is a kind of a weak notion of that. So this is a formula, and this is simple, and this is complicated. So this is what you want to understand, and this is a joint work with Breyer. Well, it should be, if the number is between 1/2 and 1 and the number is not algebraic, then the dimension should be 1. But we don't know that. So basically the reason why algebraic... so I think.
I'm talking about almost all now. I'm talking about a statement for every lambda.
Yeah. So if you
This is a conjecture.
okay, so I don't know if anyone made a conjecture about this. I definitely don't want to make a conjecture. But I think it is not unreasonable to believe that the only exceptional ones are the Pisos. That would be, at least there are no other known counterexamples. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to believe that. Okay, so here is what we can prove with Emmanuel. So it is a joint work with Breyer. So we prove that h lambda is bounded below by the minimum of 1 and the this is supposed to be negative, so minus. No, wait. What am I doing here? No. Okay, it should be positive. So 1 and log m lambda times 0.4, and we have the upper bound, which is much simpler, which is that without the constant 0.4. Okay, where m lambda is the Mahler measure of lambda. Okay. Yes. I should say first that log is base 2, and that matters because of this. This one is log 2. Okay, so I should tell you what the Mahler measure is. So the Mahler measure m lambda is equal to the product of for all sigma in the Galois group, such that sigma of lambda is bigger than 1 of the absolute value of sigma of lambda. So these are Galois elements, and if the number is at least this is true for algebraic integers, and if it is furthermore it is a unit, then it is the same as you take all the other Galois conjugates and you take the product of sigma of lambda to the -1. Because if you take the product of all the Galois conjugates, then you get plus or minus 1 if the number is unit. Okay. So up to this constant 0.4, we can tell you what h of lambda is in terms of the Mahler measure. And I mentioned briefly a conjecture, which is due to Lehmer, which says that there is a universal constant so you see you have this this denominator. So if lambda is close to 1, then this will be very small, so it will make this fraction very large. So if you can put a lower bound, universal lower bound on h lambda, then this will be bigger than 1 if lambda is sufficiently close to 1.
Well, of course, lambda is known for all sorts of numbers.
Yes, yes. So let me say that h of lambda is very often equal to 1. So 1 is the theoretical maximum that you could get, because the Shannon entropy of this random variable is at most L, because you have 2 to the L points here. And if lambda is such that it doesn't satisfy any equation with coefficients plus minus 1 or 0, then these numbers will be all different with any possible choices of plus or minus 1. So in that case, the entropy will be 1. So there are a great number, a lot of algebraic numbers for which h lambda is trivially 1. But if the Mahler measure is less than 2, then there are lots of equations that lambda satisfies, and then these numbers collide, and then the entropy will be smaller, and then it is much more difficult.
And also, the Slender conjecture is known for non-palindromic numbers, right? So
Yes. Yes.
almost all, right? Those are not roots.
Palindromic, no, but it's not for all sorts of side conditions. Or if you fix a degree, it's
Yes.
the best result is the lower bound in terms of n, which goes to 1 with n. Forget somebody with a d.
Okay. So before I go to the proof, I just want to mention is that somehow you would so this log m lambda, log m sub lambda, is a natural upper bound, and the reason is that so you look at what kind of numbers you can express with arbitrary plus minus signs here, and the number of those numbers grow like m sub lambda to the L multiplied with some polynomial in L, and this is some easy algebraic number theory. You can count these numbers simply. So that puts a natural upper bound on this, and that's why this is quite easy. And you might hope that actually maybe this is equality, but that's not the case. So I can prove that if lambda doesn't have a conjugate on the unit circle, then this inequality is strict. Well, I mean, and also the Mahler measure has to be less than 2, because otherwise both of them are probably 1.
There's something in front of the first minimum in the theorem.
Yeah, this is a constant. This is 0.4.
What?
This is 0.4.
0.4.
Yeah.
He hasn't shown us where that came from.
The 0.4 is the solution of a calculus exercise, which will come at the end of the talk. Okay, so
You're saying the upper bound is trivial, the lower bound.
the lower bound is what we are proving. That's the non-trivial part, and also we can show that this is usually strict. So you can't hope. On the other hand, what would be a very interesting question is to see what happens when you have roots on the unit circle. in particular for Salem numbers. For Salem numbers, it would be very interesting to see whether you have equality, because that's precisely the question whether the measure is whether the dimension of the measure is 1 or less than 1, because for Salem numbers, minus log lambda is equal to log of the Mahler measure. So okay. So I want to tell you about the proof. So let x be a random vector in Rd with absolutely continuous law, and then I will write h of x. And let's denote the law of this by, with absolutely continuous law, denote the density by f. So this is minus integral f log f dx. This is called differential entropy. Okay, and this is a very weird notion of entropy because it can be negative. But there is something which is slightly better than this. So let A be an element of GLD R. So it's just an invertible real matrix, and let G be standard d-dimensional Gaussian independent of x. And then I will use this notation, but I will call the conditional entropy of the random variable at scale A to be the following, that it is the differential entropy of x plus A times G minus differential entropy of A times G. Okay, so what is the meaning behind this? So you add the Gaussian here, so let's do some kind of smoothing. So what is the effect of this is that you lose information. You lose information on scales which are smaller than the A applied to the unit ball. And you can make this interpretation precise, so you can decompose the whole space into cells of size A applied to the unit ball, something comparable to that. And then you can look at the Shannon entropy of the discrete random variable, just knowing that which cell is X in. And you can show that this will be equal to that plus additive constant, which depends on the dimension. So this is a valid intuition that you think about it this way. But the argument that I'm doing, it cannot afford any error. So definitely not something. Everything has to be uniform in the dimension. That's absolutely crucial here. So you can't replace this notion with something vague. So okay. So this is one thing that I'm looking at, and a slightly more complicated thing is the conditional and the entropy of X at the scale A1 conditioned on scale A2 will be just the difference between the two entropies. So the entropy of X at scale A1 minus the entropy of X.
Why are you thinking of a matrix that's clearly some distortion as being scale? Calling it a scale. I mean, are you going to be choosing A1 and A2 carefully to use them?
So they will not be symmetric, for example. So of course, if I multiply A from the right with an orthogonal matrix, then it doesn't have any effect on this number. But later on, it will be convenient for me to pick these matrices such that they are not symmetric. It is basically, you can, if you like, you can assume that they are symmetric, and then it is basically what you are doing is that you are doing some kind of contractions or expansions in various coordinate angles. But on the other hand, if you have two matrices, these coordinate directions might come from different orthogonal bases. So, I prefer to use this generality, but I agree that there is some kind of extra space in the parameter for me, because it doesn't change if I multiply this from the right by an orthogonal matrix. Okay. So basically what I'm doing is that I want to estimate this h lambda in terms of the Mahler measure. So this means that I have to use information about all the Galois conjugates, and the way to do this is that I embed it to a d-dimensional space. And somehow the strategy of the proof is that I start with the entropy of a d-dimensional thing, and then I will do various kind of manipulations, and at the end of the day I will reduce the problem to a one-dimensional problem which involves only the Mahler measure. That's the only thing that this knows about the algebraic number. So let's see how this goes. So first I need to introduce one further notation. So for the rest of the talk, maybe before I do that, I should tell you a few properties of these. Which intuitively something that you should expect from these, but nevertheless they have to be proved. So this entropy at a scale, it is always non-negative. And it is bounded above by the Shannon entropy of X if X is singular, if X is atomic. So I hope it is not confusing. If X is atomic, then H denotes the Shannon entropy. If X is absolutely continuous, it denotes differential entropy. Okay, so somehow it is right. You measure the entropy of this random variable on a certain scale. So if the scale is very small, then presumably it approximates the Shannon entropy very much, because the Shannon entropy is knowing your random variable precisely. And this is some imprecise knowledge, so somehow the amount of information here should be between 0 and the full information. Another property is that if A1
H itself needs to be positive. This smooths it enough to make it positive.
yeah, basically because the difference between these two things are non-negative. So if A1 and A2 satisfies the property that A1 times X is less than or equal to A2 times X for all X in RD, then this conditional entropy between these two scales is non-negative, and it is and if I look at the conditional entropy of X plus Y between these two scales, then that's bigger than or equal to if Y is independent of X. Okay, so this condition can be interpreted as A1 being a smaller scale. So this is also reasonable, and also it has the property that if you take the sum of independent variables, that has more information than the original one. So for the rest of the talk, A is a matrix such that all eigenvalues are Galois conjugates of lambda, and I write X sub A X L1 L2 for the random vector. Summation goes from L1 to L2 xi I a to the I applied to the vector X. Okay, so this is a random vector in D dimension, and the reason why this comes in is that note the
This is the eigenvector with the lambda, then it's
yeah, but you don't want to choose it that way, because then it doesn't allow you to do anything extra. But nevertheless, the following is always true, that the entropy of X AX 0 L minus 1 is the same as the entropy of this. So these are now, both of these are Shannon entropies. And basically the reason is that if you look at the eigenbasis of the matrix A, then one of the coordinate projection will be precisely this one, and all the others will be Galois conjugates. So if you know one coordinate precisely, then the Galois group will tell you all the other conjugates. Okay, so let's see where is the definition of H lambda. Just I don't want to erase that. Did I erase?
Which H?
This one, my target. Okay, so it's gone. But the point is that that guy on the right hand side, you have to divide that by L and take the limit to infinity, L going to infinity. So what I'm going to do is that I will work with the left hand side. Okay, so the first step is the following, that H sub lambda is bigger than or equal to, let me use my cheat sheet. It is bigger than or equal to the limit of h of x ax 0 infinity, and between the scales a to the L and the identity matrix. Okay, and I will not formally prove this, but I will tell you why this is reasonable. So you are looking at, basically this is defined as the difference of two entropies. One of them is a constant number, so you don't care about that. What you care about is the entropy of this random vector and the scale described by a to the L. Now, if you look at that, and remember that this is an infinite series of that kind, and if you lose information which is finer than a to the L, then you lose all the terms for I greater than L. And then we arrive on the left-hand side of that formula, and then it basically boils down to the definition. Okay, so now the next step is that h of lambda is less than or equal to the entropy of the same random vector between the scales a and identity, And now, so in this step we got rid of the limit. So that's a significant step forward. And well, I'm not really proving it. But what you can do is that you can write this as a sum, or kind of a telescopic sum. So we can write h of x ax 0 infinity between the scales a to the l id as the sum of h, the same random variable, between the scale a and id plus entropy of the same thing between the scale a square conditioned on a, and so on, and you have L terms. And you can show that among these numbers, this is the largest one. This is the smallest one. And basically, the reason is that if you chop off the first term from this sum, then what you get is the law of that. So it has the same law as A applied to the original one. And then there is, basically it becomes just transformation of the integrals defining the entropies. So what I'm using here is that if you look at the entropy between scale A and ID, that should be the same as if you apply the matrix A to your random variable between the scale A square and A. And because chopping off term from this sum can only decrease entropy, that was one of those properties that I stated there. Okay, so I got rid of the limit, and now my goal is to make this problem one-dimensional. And the first thing that I do, this seems to be a very, very serious sacrifice. But it turns out that it is affordable. So you can write that h sub lambda is greater than or equal to h of xi naught times x between the scales a and id. So what have I done here? I simply forgot all the terms from this infinite sum except the first one. I kept only one term. So I could only decrease the entropy. And now, and basically the only reason I did this is because I don't know what that guy is. This one is a very simple random variable. It takes only two values with equal probabilities. And now I have complete freedom to choose the vector x and the matrix A. And what I'm going to do is that I will write, I set A to be of the form so there is a diagonal matrix 1, 1, 1, and then the last entry is the Euler measure to the -1 times an orthogonal matrix. And of course, I keep the restrictions that all the eigenvalues will be Galois conjugates of the number lambda. Now the product of all the Galois conjugates which are strictly less than 1 in absolute value, that's this number. So the question is whether there is a matrix whose singular values are all 1, the product of them. So now if you remember the definition of this one, then you applied A to a Gaussian, standard Gaussian. Now the orthogonal matrix doesn't do anything, And this last one is just scaling the last coordinate by m lambda to the minus 1. So basically, it turns out that you can integrate out d minus 1 coordinates, and then what you end up with, oops, sorry. What you end up with is a bound of the form h sub lambda is greater than or equal to the differential entropy of psi 0 plus m sub lambda to the minus 1 g minus the differential entropy of psi 0 plus g, where this is a one-dimensional standard Gaussian. And now this is the calculus exercise. So you are given m lambda. There is one more parameter here. That's the length of the vector that you choose. So given m sub lambda, choose t such that this is as big as possible, and it is not very pleasant, but also not very difficult, that you can show that this is always possible with 0.4. Okay, so this is the outline of the proof, and the details are not much more difficult. And so let me finish by saying is that, so this is also work in progress because the paper is not out there yet, but there is
Is it like a Gaussian is the best thing to put there? Independent something which has got k invariant, why is a Gaussian optimal?
so I don't know if Gaussian is optimal. One property of the Gaussian which is important to us is comes in this property, namely that if A1 and A2 satisfies this property, then the corresponding Gaussians, so the bigger Gaussian can be obtained as the smaller Gaussian convolved with something. And I don't really care about what that something is, but this feature is used. This is important here. In some other considerations, another smoothing is easier to work with, and there, because of the lack of divisibility, gives you serious headache. But that has some other advantages. So what I wanted to say is that these results are about estimating the dimension of the measure, and you would like to say that they are absolutely continuous. And there is something which is even more work in progress than the other one, and I can prove that so for every epsilon positive, there is delta positive, such that if the Mahler measure is bigger than 1 plus epsilon, such that if the Mallet measure is bigger than 1 plus epsilon and less than epsilon to the minus 1, and lambda is bigger than 1 minus delta and algebraic, otherwise the Mallet measure doesn't make any sense, so I don't even write it down, then then nu lambda is absolutely continuous. So suppose that this. So basically,
So if you assume Mahler, lemma, then this is giving you the answer near.
so basically, in the case when I was only interested about the dimension of the measures, then the only thing which could go wrong is if the Mallet measure is too small. If I care about absolutely in this argument that I'm doing, then it is also bad for you if the Mallet measure is large. But if you don't let the Mallet measure go to either 1 or too big, then there will be an interval below 1 such that any algebraic parameter there, this measure will be absolutely continuous. Okay, so thanks for your attention.